Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah wahdahu wa salatu wa salamu ala man la nabiyya ba'da. Today we'll look into a risala by Ibn AlQayyim, which is Istiqamah of the heart. Istiqamah, the steadfastness of the heart. This is a small risala which talks about the conditions which lead to Istiqamah and the matters which, because of which Istiqamah is lost. And steadfastness of the heart is what will lead to steadfastness of the limbs. So we begin this. All praise is due to Allah, and Allah's peace and blessing is upon the final messenger, his pure family, his noble companions, and all those who follow them with righteousness until the day of judgment. Ibn AlQayyim, he died in 751 Hijri. He pointed out Istiqamah is of two types. Istiqamah is of two types. The first is Istiqamah of the heart, the steadfastness of the heart. And the second is the Istiqamah of the limbs. He delves into the subject where he's putting down two conditions which are required for the steadfastness of the heart. The first is that an individual gives precedence to the love of Allah over other beloved things. And if the love of Allah contrasts with the love of other things, he gives precedence to the love of Allah over other things. Although it is very easy to claim the love of Allah, but very difficult to act according to the claim. If tested by Allah, the claimant either dignifies himself or dishonors himself. And often it turns out that the person gives precedence to what he loves and desires and to what his peers, leaders, teachers and his family love over the love of Allah. So the first condition that he is talking about is the love of Allah, and to give it the highest precedence. There are matters where you can give it directly, there's nothing involved other than the love of Allah. But there are matters which you come at a point to decide whether you need to give preference to the worldly aspects, your family or whoever you love, over the love of Allah, and that is where the test is. So you need to leave that and give precedence to the love of Allah. This is what he is talking about. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed a decree which can neither be repelled nor propelled. That whoever loves something other than Allah, it becomes a source of punishment for him. Whoever fears something other than him, Allah empowers upon him what he feared. Whoever indulges with something other than Allah, that indulgence becomes disastrous for him. Whoever gives precedence to other than Allah, he is not blessed in it. So the precedence of any love which is other than Allah is going to be destructive in some manner or the other. This is what is being talked about. It becomes a punishment, or it might become that you fear someone other than Allah, then you are left to it. You don't feel the courage which Allah would give to a muwahid. Similarly, the blessing is taken away, and it is basically displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whoever attempts to please others while displeasing Allah, then he makes others displeased with him. So he doesn't get anything from the dunya, and he is losing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. But whereas if you are steadfast towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah will give you the dunya also. What you leave for the sake of Allah, Allah will give you something better than that. The second aspect of achieving steadfastness of the heart is to have a great respect and veneration to the commands of Allah and the prohibitions of Allah. So the first is the love of Allah, and second is to have high status, high veneration for the commands of Allah, what Allah has ordered us to do, and what Allah has prohibited us from doing. This great deal of respect and veneration comes by showing respect to the one who legislated the commands and prohibitions. So the first condition leads to fulfilling the second condition. If you have the respect of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fear of Him, then inshallah the matters of the second condition becomes easy upon you to accept the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to leave what He has made prohibited for us. This great deal of respect and veneration comes by showing respect to the one who legislated the commands and prohibitions. Verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rebuked the one who does not revere Him, and the one who does not revere his commands and prohibitions. Allah says, what is the matter with you that you fear not Allah's punishment? You hope not for a reward from Allah. This is Surah An-Nuh. Surah An-Nuh, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, what is the matter with you that you do not fear the punishment of Allah and you do not hope for the reward from Allah? So Allah is asking us to put complete tawakkul and put complete hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the expectations from the abd. مَا لَكُمْ لَا تَرْجُونَ لِلَّهِ وَقَارًا. So this is the verse. Imam As-Sa'di, he said, the station of love is the bedrock of all stations. From it springs every righteous action, all beneficial deeds and all the lofty stations. Love refers to the heart being attached to the beloved such that it needs this love and cannot do without it. So this is the kayfiyah of hub, the kayfiyah of love. So if this is given, the object of love is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you will find that you will be doing things and leaving things for the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the next point is it is said that in the explanation of this verse, the verse that we read before, مَا لَكُمْ لَا تَرْجُونَ لِلَّهِ وَقَارًا, what is the matter with you that you do not fear Allah's grandeur? How wonderful is the statement of Shaykh al-Islam on the veneration of Allah's command and prohibitions. Shaykh al-Islam here is not Ibn Taymiyyah. Shaykh al-Islam, according to Ibn AlQayyim in this risala, is Abu Ismail Abdullah ibn Muhammad al-Ansari al-Harabi. And he is the author of Manazil al-Sa'irin, to which the Ibn AlQayyim wrote a commentary famously known as Madarij al-Salikin. So this Shaykh al-Islam, which in this risala what he is referring is not Ibn Taymiyyah. So he said, how wonderful is the statement of Shaykh al-Islam on the veneration of Allah's command and prohibitions. What is the statement? They are not comprised by unjustified concessions, they are not treated with excessive stringency, and they are not hinged on the causes that may weaken compliance. There are three things. Okay, so to give oneself extensive concessions, rukhsa as you say, and which will not lead to fulfilling the commands, okay, or leaving the prohibitions. Similarly, to become too strict with this matter, too strict in fulfilling the commands and too strict with avoiding the prohibitions. Too strict in the sense that you go in extravagance in it, which is beyond the deen, what is expected from the deen. Okay, or he says they are not hinged on causes that may weaken the compliance. They are not hinged. They are not taking care of the causes that is weakening their compliance to this order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The meaning of his statement is that the first station of veneration of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to respect his commands and prohibitions. And that is because the believer knows his Lord by the message which he sent through his messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, so the message necessitates submission to his commands and prohibitions, venerating Allah's command by obeying his commands, venerating Allah's prohibitions by refraining from them. This veneration from the believer for Allah's commands and prohibitions denotes veneration for the one who has legislated the commands and the prohibition. So by venerating or by having the high grandeur or high thinking of the commands and prohibitions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are actually giving the haqq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the one who legislated this upon us. So he's saying that this principle is depending on the first principle. So if you respect Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you love him, you will fulfill the commands and you will be abstaining from prohibitions. And by doing this act of leaving the haram and doing the commands, you are actually venerating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is giving back to the first principle, which is increasing you in love and increasing you in veneration of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At times an individual does what is commanded so that the creation sees him and to seek position and stature from the creation. And at times an individual abstains from the prohibitions for the fear of depreciation in the eyes of the creation, or due to the fear of punishment legislated by Allah and by His Messenger. Such a person's doing and abstaining is neither emanated due to veneration of commands and prohibitions, nor due to the veneration of the one who legislated the commands and prohibitions. So there are two aspects: the command and prohibitions itself, okay, and the second aspect is the one who is legislating the commands. So these are the two factors because of which you are fixing yourself, or you are bettering yourself. So he is saying that if you don't have the right conditions, you will not be getting the benefits of this veneration, or you will not be getting the right way of giving the haqq back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you just fear the punishment and you are doing it, you will not get the essence out of it. Okay, and if you are looking at the creation and you are doing it for the creation, you will also not get the benefits out of it. This is what he is talking about. So you have to do it only for the sake of Allah. The signs of venerating the commands, example prayers, are being vigilant of its prescribed times and its limits, investigating its pillars, its obligatory acts with perfection, hastening in perfecting it, performing it on its prescribed time, hastening towards it as soon as it is obligated, feeling remorse, grief, sorrow and worry when its rights are not fulfilled as they ought to be fulfilled. So he has given the example here of the prayer, that you are vigilant of its prescribed times and its limits, investigating its pillars, what are the pillars of the prayer, and the obligatory acts of it to perfect it, hastening to perfect it, and performing it in its prescribed time, and hastening towards it as soon as it is obligated. To keep this in mind, that it has become fard and we need to immediately establish this fard. And feeling remorse, grief, sorrow and worry when its rights are not fulfilled as it ought to be fulfilled. As the one who grieves for missing the prayer in the congregation, although knowing that if he were to pray individually, his prayer would be valid, but he will be deprived from 27 folds in rewards. So this is the grief that he has lost a big reward by not praying in congregation, although his prayer is valid if he prayed individually. So this is the grief, sorry and worry that the Shaykh is talking about, the Imam is talking about. As for the signs of venerating the prohibition, so this was regarding the commands what we saw example. As for the signs of venerating the prohibition, an individual distances himself from disobedience, from its means and from what invites him to it. He avoids every path which leads to proximity of disobedience, as the one who flees from places wherein are images, fearing from being inflicted with trials and tribulations. So example here he is given of the images in his time. He avoids that which is not harmful, fearing that it might lead to what is harmful. So the first he says is, he distances himself from disobedience. This is the first thing. The second thing is from its means, what leads to disobedience, and whoever is inviting towards it. And he avoids every path which leads to disobedience. As a person who is fleeing from where there are images, this is the fitna of his time, that if there are images, people are fleeing away from it, fearing from being inflicted with the trials and tribulations associated with it. He avoids that which is not harmful, fearing that it might lead to what is harmful. Now this is the second aspect, this is haram itself, okay, and now it's going into the matters which are lesser than that. So that he does not, so those matters don't lead him to haram, something lesser than that which might lead him to haram. He avoids excessive involvement in permissible acts, fearing that he might fall in disliked act. So too much of excessive mubah, you can say, or whatever acts are there, which it's not haram for him, okay, it is permissible for him, but he is wasting his time and he might actually lose the ahmiya or the importance of the prohibitions, and he might fall into this. He avoids the one who commits sins and proclaims them and invites towards them, negligent of them, and who is inconsiderate of committing them. So he is avoiding the people also, the people who commit the sins, the people who proclaim them, and those who invite towards the sin, and who are negligent of them, and inconsiderate of committing them. They don't care whether they do haram or halal, it doesn't make any difference for them. Now here in the footnote it's mentioned Ibn AlQayyim is referring to images prevalent in his era. What would he say to the images of our era? So this is the footnote mentioned in here. So if he is worried about the images in his era where people were drawing with his hands, Ibn AlQayyim is many years back, this is what they are discussing, and today it's become apparent. It's on our mobiles, on everywhere, as you see the marketing which happens on the road and newspapers. So mingling with similar people is in fact an invitation to Allah's anger, and none mingles with him except whose heart is void from the veneration of Allah and His prohibition. And also from the signs of venerating the prohibitions is that an individual is enraged when the prohibitions are violated. He feels remorse and broken when Allah is disobeyed in His land, and when His commands and ordinances are not established, while he is unable to change anything about it. So the least that he can do is he can have anger when he sees the haram that is happening, and he doesn't have the ability to change it. So this is the least of it. This situation is when an individual has no authority to change the situation, as Allah's Messenger ﷺ said, "Whoever among you sees evil, let him change it with his hand. If he is unable to do so, then with his tongue. If he is unable to do so, then with his heart, and that is the weakest level of faith." This is the hadith of Muslim. From the signs of venerating the commands and prohibitions is that the command is not carried out based upon underlying reasons. The commands and the rulings of Allah are accepted with submission, whether the underlying reason is apparent or hidden. So if we understand that this command that Allah is giving, there is a hikmah behind it, and only then we do it, this is not from the sifat of the slave of Allah. He accepts it in full submission. Okay? And then he doesn't, whether he understands it, whether the reasons are apparent or it is apparent. He does it because of the two conditions we saw. One, because he loves Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and second, it is the amr of Allah, it's the command of Allah, and He has told us to stay away from the prohibited. So this is the reason why he is doing it, rather than looking into the hikmah behind it, whether what are the benefits of prayers. Example, if you pray, it's something like that. Like nowadays people, because it's kind of an apologetic manner, they want to give reasons for people to come to pray or to pray, something like the benefits of yoga. So they are basically saying that if you are in this position, this happens, that maybe it happens, but that is not the reason for prayers. The reasons is because we are doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as Allah has ordered us. Similarly, the reality of venerating the commands and the prohibitions of Allah is that they are not comprised by unjustified concessions and are not treated with excessive stringency. As we saw, there are no unjustified concessions, meaning you are not giving yourself too many excuses, and especially those excuses which don't have a weight to fulfill the command or leave the prohibition. Similarly, you are not too excessive with it, that you are not giving the rights of your body and rights of the people that are depending on you. So you have to maintain the balance. The haqq of Allah, the haqq of the people you are responsible for, and the haqq of your body. So you have to give balance of this. You can't be too extensive and stringy like some of those who have dedicated themselves into this and left the dunya. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is that he in the meaning of it, it means that he is also fulfilling the rights of the dunya, and he is also fulfilling the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But they are extensive in this. The objective is the straight path leading to Allah. This is the objective. It's to be balanced. Allah does not legislate the commands and prohibitions except that shaitan takes two approaches in misleading humans. Now we come at the aspects which basically would cause us to lose steadfastness. So we understood what is steadfastness, how to achieve it, the two principles on it, and now what would cause deviations or losing steadfastness. So shaitan takes two approaches. One is shortcomings and negligence. This is the approach. The second approach is excessiveness and extremism. And he is not bothered by which approach he succeeds, meaning whichever way is possible, he will try to succeed and make us lose steadfastness. Shaitan whiffs the person's heart, and if he finds him lazy, negligent, and looking for unjustified concessions, he traps him in that, seizes him, and inflicts him with laziness, slackness, and tepidness. Whiffs here means he kind of smells, or he tries to get a feel of the heart of the person, and based on that he will decide on his attack. Basically, if he finds him lazy, negligent, or too much unjustified concessions giving to himself, then he traps him in that. It's easy for him to work on that and lead him astray based on that. Then shaitan opens for him the door to alternate interpretations, vain hope, and other similar aspects until he abandons all the commandments completely. So slowly, step by step, he will open more reasons for him to deviate, and he abandons that amr of Allah completely. If shaitan whiffs the person's heart, this is the case of the second person. If shaitan whiffs the person's heart and finds him to be vigilant, active, energetic, he despairs in succeeding him in that. Instead, he deceives him to do more than what is required and insinuate him that this is not sufficient for you. Your ambition is higher than this. It is incumbent upon you to accomplish more than others. So he puts him into competition with himself, he puts him into competition with others to become more excessive in this, in this deed, and making him think that what he is doing is not enough for him. So this is another way of deceiving. And other similar insinuations. Shaitan makes mankind go to extremes and excess, surpassing the straight path. And as he made the first person negligent in fulfilling the required acts and not reach near to it. So here Ibn AlQayyim, he exemplifies that Istiqamah comprises of 6 matters. What are the 6 matters? Failing to fulfill in any of them, either partially or totally, leads to the failure of Istiqamah. There are 6 matters he brings in. If you don't fulfill it completely, or if you are not able to do it properly, it will lead to the failure in Istiqamah. The first 2 are what? Performing the required acts and exerting to achieve the desired goal. So what is expected from us, we try to do it, and we try to achieve the goal behind it. So this is the first 2 points. The third point here is moderation. That is being between being negligent and between extreme in the required acts. So being balanced, basically, not to be too negligent, and not to be too extreme in doing that act, and trying to be balanced. The fourth point he is mentioning is acting upon what the knowledge demands instead of what the experiential state demands. As if his kayfiyah is good, so based on his kayfiyah he is performing the deed. If his kayfiyah is not that way, then it affects his fulfilling the obligation. Okay, so or maybe there are cases where a person might, like the Sufis, how they say that they are getting some ideas of certain acts of worship, which is specially to them, or leaving certain acts of worship because they attain a certain levels. So this is something which is confined to him, that he is claiming to experience or he is concocting, we don't know. But in either case, it's him who is actually establishing this fact, okay, to either fulfill a command or leave the prohibition. And that's how they have the levels in them, as where the higher they go, the Sharia is not obligatory upon them. This is what they say. So this is one of the extremes. But in general sense for the people is what? That if he is feeling like praying today, he goes and prays. If he is not feeling like praying today, he will not pray. As simple as that. Or if he is feeling like praying in the Jama'ah, he'll go and pray in the Jama'ah. If he is feeling like, okay, khalas, today I'll pray at home, he'll pray at home. Or maybe he wants to delay it, he's got some work, and he delays it to pray it after the time has ended. So, not fulfilling it on time, without any genuine excuses. So this is based on his feeling, how he feels, and he fulfills the actions. The fifth point is sincerity in the actions, doing it only for the sake of Allah. And the sixth point is adhering to the Sunnah, doing it according to the teachings of Prophet ﷺ. Many of the Salaf often combine the two principles, which is moderation in actions and adhering to the Sunnah. So the moderation in actions and adhering to the Sunnah, they combine it together. Shaitan sniffs and tests the heart of the servant. If he sees that the heart has an element of inclination towards innovation and evasion from perfect submission towards the Sunnah, Shaitan causes him to be lack in adhering to the Sunnah. And he sees that the heart is keen towards adhering to the Sunnah, he fails to influence him in that matter. So what he is saying is, if the heart is inclined towards innovation and towards perfectly submitting oneself to the Sunnah, then Shaitan causes him to be in a state of lack of adhering to the Sunnah. And if he sees that he adheres to the Sunnah strongly, then Shaitan does not have any influence over him. This is from Madarij al-Salikin. The quote is from Ibn AlQayyim, as documented in Madarij al-Salikin. So, what is the goal from this Risala? The main purpose is that we understand that the veneration of Allah, having high regards for Allah, and the veneration of what He legislated from the commands and prohibition are our goals basically. We need to work towards this, and when we work towards this, we will attain Istiqamah. And at the same time, we need to know the attacks of Shaitan for us to become negligent or to be too strict or excessive in certain matters, and then in the process we lose Istiqamah. So the main purpose of Shaitan by setting the two approaches is to keep mankind off the straight path, either by making him negligent in fulfilling the required actions or by making him excessive in fulfilling the required acts. Most of the people are inflicted with this ailment, and nothing can save them except firm knowledge, Iman, strength to resist Shaitan, and clinging to moderation. And Allah is the one whose aid is sought. So with this we end the Risala. It's a small Risala, but it's a good reminder for us to look into these aspects and try to better ourselves and better our hearts, because if the hearts are better, then the limbs will perform in accordance to it. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Jazakumullahu khairan. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.